Every single coaching job in the NHL is a great job. But for me, this job at this moment with this team was the exact job that I wanted.
It's hard to deny that Jeff Blashill absolutely nailed his opening press conference as head coach, but the elephant in the room still remains. I ranked him at the bottom of Tier 3, and it's safe to say that plenty of other fans are even less optimistic than I was. So why did the Blackhawks choose him over other options, and does he have what it takes to prove me and other skeptical fans wrong? To answer those questions, we'll first take a closer look at Blashill's coaching career to highlight the one key trait that sets him apart from all other candidates. We'll then break down his tactics to see how they mesh with a young Hawks roster and revisit some of his missteps in Detroit and how he can learn from them to be a better head coach in Chicago. And if you stick around to the end, I'll reevaluate my rankings based on everything that I've learned to see whether Blashill deserves a bump in hindsight. But let's start off by getting ahead of the narrative. Many of Blashill's biggest critics point to his 7-year stint of abject failure in Detroit as a defining feature of his career. But that doesn't tell the full story. Apart from the fact that the rosters he was handed in Detroit were absolutely horrendous, Blashill already built up a long track record of success in multiple different leagues long before he even took that position. He began his head coaching career in the USHL in 2008, when he took over as both general manager and head coach of the Indiana Ice. Over 2 seasons, he compiled a 72-43-5 record, including a franchise record 39 wins and a Clark Cup championship in his first year. He then continued on to the NCAA, where he spent 1 season as the head coach of Western Michigan. That year, he led Western Michigan to a top 4 finish in the CCHA, the CCHA championship game, and the 2011 NCAA Division I men's ice hockey tournament, which amounted to the most successful season for the university in 15 years. He was then hired by Mike Babcock to be an assistant coach in Detroit, but took their AHL head coaching position with Grand Rapids a season later. It did not take him long to become their winningest ever head coach. He became the first coach in Griffin's franchise history to post 3 consecutive 40-win and 90-point seasons, guided the team to the Calder Cup playoffs every single year, and won 7 of 9 total playoff series, including the first Calder Cup championship in franchise history. If you were an Ice Hawks fan at the time, you probably remember just how terrifying those Grand Rapids teams were, and Blashill was a big reason for that. But his success goes well beyond trophies and individual awards, because his track record of development in each of those stops is genuinely second to none. In his 2 seasons in the USHL, Blashill coached Torrey Krug, Anthony Bitetto, Nick Dowd, Blake Coleman, and Casey DeSmith, all of whom turned into NHL players. In his 1 season in the NCAA, he coached Danny DeKeyser, who later joined Blashill at the NHL level with Detroit, as well as Matt Tennyson and Luke Witkowski, both of whom also became NHL players. At the AHL level, he helped develop Gustav Nyquist, Tomasz Tatar, Luke Glendening, Kalle Jarnkrok, Peter Mrazek, Anthony Mantha, and many more. It's no surprise that a rebuilding team like the Blackhawks would naturally be drawn to a coach like Blashill, whose track record shows success in developing players throughout the junior landscape into effective NHL talent. And even though his track record of overall success didn't carry over to his 7-year stint as Detroit head coach, his developmental achievements absolutely did, because several young NHL players put up their best ever seasons under Blashill, and 2 notable ones should be familiar to Blackhawks fans. Andreas Athanasiou put up a 30-goal and 54-point season under Blashill, which was of course his career best. Tyler Bertuzzi put up a 30-goal and 64-point season under Blashill, which is also his career best up to this point. Bertuzzi specifically had nothing but great things to say about the role the coach had in his own development, stating, "He did a great job with us in the Red Wings, and I'm just looking forward to working with him again. He likes to preach simplicity, north-south, play hard, and obviously plays will be made when they're available." This idea is reflected heavily in Blashill's mentality, as he's not very interested in convoluted schemes or overcoaching his players. Take a listen.
I'm a big believer in teaching fundamentals and habits over system play. I was talking with an NFL head coach last year, and it was interesting. Football is the most static, or at least one of the most static sports, where there's a stop, there's a start, and it's way different than hockey, which is super fluid. You think of football being all about schematics, schemes, systems. And he said to me, systems never win. Players making plays because they have great fundamentals and habits is what wins.
To this end, Blashill doesn't have many revolutionary ideas in his scheme. His offensive zone forecheck is a simple 1-2-2 that is slightly more passive than Luke Richardson's was. There are times that it becomes more aggressive. For example, off lost offensive zone faceoffs, the 1-2-2 becomes more of a 2-1-2, where the two forwards have free rein to forecheck and the third forward retreats to the middle of the ice to form a defensive line in the neutral zone with the two defensemen. But the most aggressive part of the forecheck occurs in the neutral zone, which makes sense since Blashill cares so much about his fundamentals, and the most important fundamental to him is close support. In every facet of the game, Blashill coach teams stay tightly connected to support one another at all times. It makes sense that the most aggressive part of the forecheck away from the puck is in the neutral zone, when each player has 4 teammates in close proximity supporting them. But the emphasis on close support is at its most obvious on breakouts, because when Blashill's teams have possession in the defensive zone, they do everything they can to keep that possession. Blashill refers to this as the puck is gold mentality, and the way he integrated it into his system in Detroit is through what he likes to call the triangle support system. I will note that in his press conference, he flirted with the idea of designing a slightly different breakout to better facilitate the skill sets of the Blackhawks' young defensemen, so it's not a foregone conclusion that he will use the same system in Chicago. In any case, the idea is that the D1, D2, and F1, which is often the center, are in a close triangle where each spoke is interchangeable with one another, but the shape and size is not meant to change. When one player advances forwards in possession of the puck, he knows based on the structure that he has 2 very predictable and very near passing options regardless of the path he takes. So if he runs into trouble, he doesn't need to reassess to figure out where his teammates are. He can instead make a safe pass to a waiting teammate due to the structure. The one main area of flexibility is when the triangle moves away from F2 or F3, that forward has a license to push pace and find an opening. But otherwise, even they are responsible for retreating backwards and facing the puck to be available if the triangle needs them. Just because they aren't spokes in the triangle doesn't mean that they're not responsible for close support. The obvious benefit to this idea is in puck possession. Gone are the days of defensemen yeeting the puck out of the defensive zone for icings whenever they're in trouble, because in this scheme, tape-to-tape passing means everything, and each defenseman has 2 reliable and nearby passing options to facilitate that. Increased possession leads to cleaner breakouts and more reliable chance creation. Now, you may be confused why Blashill's teams tend to dump the puck in so much, even though he seems addicted to possessing the puck, and we'll cover that momentarily. But in any case, the golden triangle support system helps eliminate mistakes and turnovers at the defensive blue line, which is one of Blashill's golden rules. And speaking of those rules, now's a good time to note that Blashill's rules do not change from player to player. He was very clear to point out in his opening press conference that the entire team is expected to play with the same fundamentals. They're expected to backcheck with the same urgency and through the same channels when turnovers happen. They're expected to closely support their teammates in the same way without cheating out of structure, and they're expected to have the same patterns of play in the offensive zone. In that way, nobody on the team has special treatment, and the team is very clear on their expectations. The benefit to that when it works perfectly is that there is no confusion when integrating new players. One of my favorite stories about the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers didn't even happen during the regular season. Nate Schmidt signed as a free agent before the season began, and in his first preseason game, he made a poor decision in the offensive zone. But when he got back to the bench, it wasn't even a coach that corrected him. It was a member of the Panthers leadership group with a simple, "We don't do that." That line says it all. The team's standard of excellence and attention to detail is so deeply ingrained that the players themselves enforced it. No coaching intervention was required. That is the kind of culture that can only be built when the rules are not bent for anybody, and it's something that Blashill believes in deeply. Now, of course, that's not to say that Blashill is some perfect coach. Firstly, the scheme he runs itself has some inherent limitations. We'll only talk through one of them in the interest of time, but if other issues materialize matchups throughout the season, we'll be sure to cover them. One interesting quirk of the underlying scheme is that chance creation is often very transition-based. Now, on one hand, that's good for young players to not overthink and rely too much on the cycle, and it could theoretically force them to make quicker and more effective decisions. Again, this goes back to Blashill being a developmental head coach. He takes a lot of pride in putting players in position to develop their hockey IQ, and this slash and burn style offense is a crucial part of that. Every pass is designed to get the puck into a more dangerous area, and Blashill coached teams play a very direct game. For example, I expect Connor Bedard to be coached to shoot the puck more when in dangerous areas instead of holding onto it and trying to find the perfect play. But on the other hand, the aggressive nature of this offensive strategy makes mistakes extremely costly. Any bad pass or lost battle almost always leads to a dangerous odd man rush the other way. The defensemen have a lot of ice to cover in transition, so some of the same struggles that we saw with Korchinski under Richardson may begin to materialize again under Blashill. But there are a few coaching points that he introduced to help combat these issues. Firstly, when back-checking, wingers were always taught to retreat from the dots, not from the outside. That leads to more fluid and positionless hockey when one or two players are out of position. By being so close to the middle of the ice, wingers can easily cover for centers and defensemen when necessary. Secondly, Blashill worked extremely hard to enforce that tight support fundamental that we talked about earlier, because it's far less likely to turn the puck over on a 5-foot pass that you've practiced a billion times than it is a 50-foot pass that you're trying to improvise mid-game. And if you avoid turnovers, you of course avoid odd man rushes the other way. To this end, he taught and reinforced set plays and tape-to-tape passing constantly in practice to limit mistakes. But this reliance on tight support means that Blashill coach teams are often taught not to use the full width of the ice. This is reinforced in multiple practice drills. For example, the transition drills that he uses to reinforce that triangle support concept actually divide the ice into smaller pieces and force the team to maintain possession effectively in those tighter areas. Now, this inherently helps with the development of hockey IQ, since players need to have quick and decisive decisions to thrive in these settings. It's very common for young players in the NHL to get lost on the outside of the ice, which was one of the biggest issues with Lukas Reichel over the past couple of seasons. Playing in a close support scheme will force quicker decision making, which will ideally eliminate the phenomenon of young players overthinking everything. But it also has to be said, the Blackhawks have plenty of players both on the team and in the system who may be overwhelmed in a scheme like this. For example, Ilya Mikheyev just had a career offensive resurgence by using his speed on the outside to create space for his line mates. And although he likely still have very good two-way impact under Blashill, he probably won't be able to create offense as easily. In any case, the third coaching point that Blashill introduced to prevent odd man rushes is a more conservative offensive zone forecheck than you'd probably expect, and this on paper again makes total sense. If you're less aggressive chasing the puck in deep, you're less susceptible to odd man rushes if you lose those puck battles. But this is also one of the biggest reasons that so many people think Blashill is a bad coach, because his Red Wings teams had a habit of dumping the puck in and then not chasing it. That is one of the most frustrating things to watch as a fan, because the only thing more annoying than a dump and chase heavy scheme is a dump and give the puck away for free scheme. Now, there are two things to note here. Firstly, if Blashill's opening press conference was any indication, he emphasized applying pressure away from the puck, so hopefully this won't become an issue in Chicago. But secondly, I'm gonna say something that's both controversial and could very well age terribly, so bear with me here. I actually don't think that Blashill is inherently a dump and chase coach. I just think that his teams were completely incapable of executing his preferred strategy of entries, and that he wasn't able to adjust his tactics effectively to counteract that. Let me explain. We already spent a lot of time going through his fundamentals, but plenty of those fundamentals go directly against a dump and chase mentality. For instance, Blashill's puck is gold rhetoric of maintaining possession at all costs in the defensive and neutral zones seemed to contradict the team's willingness to give up that possession for a 50-50 battle as soon as they neared the blue line. In fact, one of the coach's favorite practice drills is what he likes to call the Barcelona drill, which is a transition-based exercise that is game realistic, except that the red line determines offside, not the blue line. In other words, the player carrying the puck with possession has to cross the red line before any of his teammates, and because of this, nobody is allowed to cheat towards the offensive blue line. Now, think about this. This drill makes absolutely no sense if Blashill intended to run a dump and chase scheme. If he wanted to run that system, the ideal situation would be if the puck carrier drilled the puck in from the red line as the other forwards were already crossing the blue line with speed. That way, those forwards would have a momentum advantage against the stationary defense, which would at least create better scenarios where they could win the puck back. Blashill did not teach this and instead focused exclusively on close support. Now, to be clear, just because I don't think that Blashill is a dump and chase coach does not mean that he's not at fault for how dump and chase centric the Red Wings were. Ultimately, it shows either that he didn't know how to coach a dump and chase system or that he was too set on a different system that his roster couldn't handle. Blashill's biggest critics believe the former, and I just happen to believe the latter, and I hope that he's able to learn from his experiences to better adjust in the future. But the most interesting thing about this phenomenon happened in Blashill's final season in Detroit, because for the first time ever in his reign, the coach had an influx of elite rookie talent. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Maurice Cider. Blashill only got the opportunity to coach Cider during his rookie season, but even now, 4 seasons later, that 1 year remains by far Cider's best offensive output of his career. And the interesting thing about that is Cider achieved this while getting some clear leeway from Blashill that the coach never really afforded anybody else. In the neutral zone, Cider played an even more aggressive style than defensemen typically did, often acting as a pseudo fourth forward to step in passing lanes and turn defense into offense. When he was on the ice, a forward was always taught to watch out for his positioning and to cover for him in those areas. Now, the offensive zone and defensive zone systems remained relatively unchanged, but Cider got comfortable working outside of that system and never got pushback for it. In several instances, he completely overskated the triangle and burst forward coast to coast. He often carried the puck single-handedly through the offensive zone with possession and almost never relied on the dump and chase. He even found several long stretch passes to forwards on the outside of the ice, which is incredibly rare for a Blashill coach team. Despite being such a focal point of the team's transition play, Cider seemed to play a very anti-Blashill style, and the coach allowed him to do that, and the rest of the team started to respond to it. Now, it's incredibly difficult to find accurate stats of zone entries to support this theory, but I was able to track 1 full game during Cider's rookie season. I understand that it's not a great sample size, but it is the best that I could find. In any case, in this randomly selected game against Tampa Bay, the Red Wings had 36 total entries at 5-on-5, and only 16 of them were dump-ins. The rest were all carry-ins or pass-ins, and of the 3 entries that Cider was personally responsible for, none of them were dump-ins. It is interesting, however, that even though the team cut down on dump and chases during the season, their effectiveness on those dumps was still laughably bad. Of those 16 dump-ins in this game, only 3 of them were recovered by a teammate. So it's safe to say that I still believe that Blashill will need to find the right strategies on zone entries to increase possession metrics, but the fact that he did adjust to this degree to an elite talent like Cider is a great sign. In fact, the more that I watch Blashill, the more I realize that he's not as rigid of a coach as I initially thought. Many people are just used to thinking of him as a Babcock-trained old-school coach, and it's true that the base scheme is very conservative and very structured, but he's just a coach that preaches that actions have consequences, and in many ways, his scheme just reinforces that idea. If you take risks in the scheme, you better be sure that they will work, because mistakes will come back to bite you. The triangle breakout is designed to protect players from reckless turnovers at the defensive blue line, but Blashill gave Cider the option to carry the puck coast to coast and to ignore that rigid structure as long as he was 100% sure that his decision would not lead to a turnover. And if he did make a mistake, Cider was single-handedly responsible for taking it upon himself to backcheck and eliminate that mistake. There's a reason that Bertuzzi said if you play hard for him, he's an easy coach to get along with. Given how many naturally gifted players the Blackhawks have, it will be interesting to see the extent that Blashill gives them flexibility to work beyond the scheme. Now, if you stuck around till now, first of all, you're a legend and please consider subscribing, but second of all, let's finally answer the question that we began the video with. With all the information that I gained, would I change my ranking of Blashill in hindsight? Well, the objectively correct answer is that only time will tell, but that's a cop-out, so here's what I'll say. No, I still think that he's a tier 3 coach with clear limitations in his scheme, but his strengths are in development, which is perfect for this team. I think he showed a lack of adjustment in his 7 years in Detroit that ultimately contributed to his demise, but he then showed the willingness to learn by choosing to work under John Cooper, one of the most adaptable coaches in the NHL. And ultimately, it's hard to deny that he's a clear upgrade on previous coaches. He stands up for his teams to referees, he maintains a high standard for his players and is consistent with it, he is receptive and understanding of specific needs, and he is one of the most well-respected coaches around league circles. The Blackhawks have had way too many assistant coaches cosplaying as head coaches recently, and even if you're wary of Blashill's tactical rigidity or imperfect track record, you should be excited that he is the most respected coach the Blackhawks have had since Joe Quenneville, and that he was by far the best available developmental head coach. Blashill at his worst won't ever win you a Stanley Cup, but he would still dramatically accelerate the development of young prospects, and for the Blackhawks, that is priority number 1. So how would you grade the Blackhawks' decision to hire Jeff Blashill? Let me know and I'll see you down in the comment section and in the next video. Until next time.